Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for being here today with us. And I would like to thank the European Liberal Forum and KEFiM, the Center for Liberal Studies, Marcos Dragoumis, for giving me the opportunity to host this event today. I believe it is a very important and a very timely one, because we know the access to the European Union and the status of EU membership require significant reforms in order for a country to align with the Union's overall legal framework and its values. However, we can all agree that we currently experience a deterioration in civil liberties, both in EU member states as well as in the candidate countries. And the migration and the refugee crisis, along with populism, have deteriorated this situation. So today we're going to look into whether the EU and the reforming period for candidate countries do actually foster political freedom. First of all, I would like to ask Daniel Kaddik, Executive Director at European Liberal Forum, and Alexander Skouras, President of KEFiM, for some opening remarks. Mr. Kaddik, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, good evening to everyone around. I have the big pleasure welcoming you on behalf of the European Liberal Forum, the political foundation and think tanks of the European liberals. I have an even greater pleasure, and that is opening this event that is organized together with our friends and our members from KEFiM, but also the For Freedom Foundation from Turkey. And I think those two together pretty much show what liberalism, but also what the European Liberal Forum is all about. It's bringing people together and looking for liberal answers to European political questions, to find a way to discuss a liberal future in a united Europe. But it's not only answering those questions, but it's also looking at a very fundamental problem today, answering the question, is the EU worth its membership in some degree, in some aspects? And while for the old EU member states, the Union has been a necessity, for young members, it has been a promise for economic prosperity, but also for more political freedom. And so today's launch of the publication of EU Accession and Political Freedom is not only debating this topic, but it's also bringing together the findings, the results and discussion from two publications, one about political freedom and the other one about economic freedom. Two of the key questions that were asked by young members when they were joining, two areas that were loaded with the most hope for the young member countries, but especially for the citizens when they were joining. So the only thing I can do now is to say a big thank you to our friends from KEFiM, for the For Freedom Foundation, to all our members, that they keep working on those big issues together with us, and especially organizing this event together with us to discuss these important subjects, to give us answers that we can use for getting a bit more, let's say, moral and argumentative air superiority in the battle of ideas around the European Union. Thank you very much.
Thank you, thank you. Now, Mr. Skouras.
Thank you so much, Ms. Stamouli. Greetings, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be with you today. Daniel, I want to thank you and the European Liberal Forum team for the amazing support and contribution in this series of important questions that we're trying to answer. Let me tell you a few words about our organization. The Center for Liberal Studies, also known as KEFiM, is the leading liberal think tank in my country, in Greece. Actually, we have the pleasure to have my predecessor with us today, Gregory Valianatos, from whom you're going to hear about his comments on this important study later on. And one of the things that we are trying to do is to enrich public discourse with sound data and sound arguments. And this was one of the most important projects that we've undertaken in partnership with ELF and the Freedom Research Association, although we work a lot with them, with our friends from Turkey, because 2 years ago, we realized that the European Union as an institution is being attacked from all fronts for as far as a liberal is concerned, right? On the one hand, we have Eurosceptics who are saying that the EU is a big bureaucratic force that is not conducive to economic freedom. And on the other hand, we constantly hear that under the guise of the EU, there have been reductions in, there's a democratic deficit, or there are questions about the state of political freedoms in the EU. And this is a valid question. Both of these are valid questions to ask. And what we can do as think tanks and as parts of civil society within the European Union is to try to answer these questions with convincing data, with sound methodology and analysis. And by looking at both of these studies, but especially the current one that we're going to talk about today, I want to congratulate the research team led by Emmanuel Schizas, Konstantinos Harabakos, and all the rest who participated in this study, because the findings are really interesting. And as a liberal would expect, most of these accusations are not true. However, we find some very interesting information with regards to political freedom, and that is that there has been a declining trend. And these are important questions that we're going to have to answer and play our part as liberal institutions if we want to have a say in the way that the European Union is going to head over the next decade. So with that being said, once again, I want to thank everyone for being here today. It's a great pleasure, and we're extremely happy to be presenting the findings of this important study to every one of you today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now I would like to ask Emmanuel Schizas, lead researcher and author, member of KEFiM's academic board, leading Regulation and RegTech at the Cambridge Center for Alternative Finance, to present us KEFiM's research on the topic we're discussing today.
Thank you, Nectaria, and thanks everyone for joining us. Thanks also, of course, to the European Liberal Forum for their support in this study. I'm very honored, obviously, to follow the introductions you've just heard. Happily, also, there's a lot that they've covered that I don't need to repeat in my own presentation, which is quite fortunate. You should all be able to see my screen, so I'll just obviously, if anybody has any problems, give me a quick nudge. As has already been discussed, this is the second of a series of similar studies that look into the impact of EU accession and membership on different aspects of freedom. Our first study, released last year, looked into economic freedom and its relationship with EU accession. The one we will discuss today focuses on political freedom, so on civil rights, individual liberties, equality, access to justice, all of these areas. And I think I'm not giving too much away in showing you this brief graph that draws on data from the Global State of Democracy Index. This is the the documentation of a medium-term declining trend in protection and support for fundamental rights, not just in the EU, but in broader Europe and indeed most of the developed world. This trend has been going strong for about a decade now. So we're long past the point where we could dismiss it as a blip. It's now a stylized fact. It's something we need to address in research. So that's partly the answer to the question at the top of this slide. So why examine this now? But of course, we're coming, as other speakers have already hinted, into an era when the EU's ability to embed and to project and to defend its values is coming under question. You have clashes between Brussels and both new member states and accession countries regarding such diverse matters, ranging from rule of law to LGBT rights. And indeed, there's a significant deterioration EU-wide in terms of the headline figures. I think it's also worth noting that the EU has just concluded a significant program of work, the Rights, Equality and Citizenship program. Almost €500 million worth of money invested in kind of embedding rights and liberties and support for those in the member states. It seems an appropriate time, given that it expired last year, to start looking into a post-mortem of what exactly has been achieved there. And of course, with all of these studies, there's always an interest in closing gaps in the academic literature. And you know, on the one hand, there's a dearth of studies that have actually looked in detail into the recent deterioration. From an empirical perspective, there's a lot of literature that focuses on qualitative studies or ethnographies or case studies, but you know, nothing, not much that is empirically founded. But also where there is empirical work, it tends to be highly focused on highly controversial individual studies of individual policies, which doesn't quite give you a picture in the round of what is happening around Europe. Now, just to clarify what we're testing, we're looking at whether a particular proxy for a country's degree of political freedom, and I'll talk about which proxy that is, correlates with its progress through the different milestones of EU accession. So we follow countries from candidate status all the way to membership, all the way, in contrast to our previous study, to mature member status. And what we want to understand is not just whether there's a headline association, but actually what kind of mechanisms are powering it. So what is particularly about EU accession and membership that actually contributes to greater political freedom? So these are the research questions, if you want. Now, I did promise I'd discuss the particular concept of political freedom we're studying. As with economic freedom, quantifying these sorts of things is a very difficult business. And anyone who's dealt with these types of aggregate data and indices will tell you that they are difficult beasts. Methodologically, there's always room for improvement. There's issues around robustness, reliability, and so on and so forth. So we had to make our selection quite carefully. There's a number of quantitative proxies out there. International IDEA has the Global State of Democracy indices, which are the ones we're using. The Democracy Barometer is widely cited. The Economist Intelligence Unit publishes its own democracy index. So there's no shortage of headline figures. I think where the trick is to pick one that actually works for a proper empirical study. We've chosen to focus on the Global State of Democracy index, and particularly its fundamental rights subindex. That one breaks down into three constituents: access to justice, civil liberties, social rights, and equality, which is a good fit to what we're trying to measure and capture here. The Global State of Democracy has certain advantages from an empirical studies point of view. It has good time series coverage, goes up all the way to 2019, which is quite crucial. It has a significant hard data component, so it's not completely led by expert or survey-based inputs. And it has relatively low variance. So it means that the measure itself is reasonably rigorous and robust, and it allows us to create more accurate metrics. Now, those of you who have watched our presentation on last year's study on economic freedom in EU accession will remember that the way we study these sort of things is by looking not at what happens to the different kind of freedom scores, but rather what happens to freedom gaps. So what we do is we measure each country's distance from the best-in-class performance amongst its peers in that same year. So for instance, we're not interested in Greece's absolute score in any of these indices. We're interested in how far it is from the best performer. And again, that's a treatment that allows us to remove a lot of unnecessary variance in our data. One of the key impacts of this is that our impact scores our parameters are reversed. So you will sometimes see things that have a negative sign, and they're actually good things. I will remind you of that, so you don't need to keep that in mind. So what exactly does EU accession do, and how are we quantifying that? Well, basically the key mechanism you would expect whereby EU accession makes a difference is, of course, people have to meet the Copenhagen criteria. Member states have to meet the Copenhagen criteria prior to accession. They have to onboard the acquis, so the existing kind of pro-market and indeed pro-liberty legal framework. And indeed, once they are EU member states, of course, there's a continued process, for instance, of compliance with decisions of European courts, of infraction proceedings that continue to kind of guide and motivate members to, to align, I guess, with the EU's values. Now, we have created a dependent variable for our purposes, which ranges kind of from 1 to 4 different levels of proximity to the EU. I'll explain what that is. And one thing we've done differently to last year is we've added one more step in proximity to the EU. So we distinguish between new and mature member states. We use 8 years as the cutoff point. Now, 8 years is arbitrary. You might say, why not 5? Why not 10? The reason we went for that one was because it's the average gap between 2 different enlargement waves. So empirically, you can say that that's a good estimate of how long it takes for old member states to become comfortable with how new member states have performed in their roles. So I won't spend too much on the actual model specification, because of course anyone who wants to dive deep into the methodology can do that. But it's just important to state that we've got a rich data set. We've got observations over 30 years for 46 countries. There's obviously not 46 EU member states, but what we've done is we've also added, by way of control groups, OECD countries from outside the EU, and signatories to the European Convention of Human Rights who are not EU members, so that we can start isolating the effect effectively of EU membership. So the other things we try to account for, apart from the influence of the EU, drawing on the literature, we know that the ability to protect and provide political freedoms is significantly correlated with the capacity of the state. Regulatory quality, the ability to actually run a state properly. It correlates with national wealth. So we account for all of these things. We account also for, I guess, the most salient cultural and political influences. So we look at, for instance, the ideology of ruling parties, the dominant religion. We look at whether countries are, have just come out of a period of post-socialist transition. And uniquely this time around, we've also added, as one of our controls, the size and volume of refugee inflows. And the reason we have done this is because we tried to test different hypotheses for what might have happened post 2012, for instance, that has made such a difference to the political freedom scores that we see in the EU and abroad. One final thing to note here is that it's quite challenging to disaggregate the impact of EU membership from the impact of being subject to the jurisdiction of the European Court of Human Rights. That's a non-negligible contributor to Europe's performance in terms of the protection and promotion of fundamental rights. Now, we have done our best to tease those two influences apart. I'll show you what we found, but please bear in mind that there is such close correlation that there is always room for confounding effects. So with that introduction out of the way, and I urge everyone who is keen on the methodology to look into the report itself, I just wanted to walk you through briefly our findings. Now, in summary, I'll flash the table in front of you again, but I don't think many people want to see this. We've tried basically 4 different specifications of our analysis, and the results tend to be quite similar. The headline finding is that the closer you get to mature EU membership, the more the gap between your country and the best-in-class performers in terms of fundamental rights closes. So that in itself is of course, what we wanted to ascertain, what we wanted to find out. But we also know that this effect is incremental to the effect of being a signatory to the European Convention of Human Rights and subject to the ECHR's decisions. So, so there are two distinct effects there, which are worth looking into. This effect is also incremental to the impact of just being a well-regulated, well-run country. So you can't just dismiss that as a case of EU members being better off states or better run states. No, there's something more fundamental having in there. Our findings confirm what the literature says about state capacity, obviously. So, richer, better run, and more urbanized countries generally performed better. What we found also was that there was a significant correlation between refugee numbers and the freedom scores of different countries. Basically, what we found was that the response to influxes of immigrants in recent years has often been at the detriment or to the detriment of political freedoms. Now, we can explore what this means. There's several different ways of interpreting it. You could say that this is almost a mechanical effect of poor treatment of new arrivals being recorded by those who compile indices like this. So it could just be a case of saying, this has revealed things about us that perhaps, native citizens of EU countries have not known about themselves. At the same time, of course, you can't completely dismiss the possibility that there is a certain element of editorial bias. You can also look at the theory that says that the response that really matters, that led to a deterioration in political freedom, is the fact that effectively large influxes of new arrivals have meant that native populations have voted for governments that are more reactionary, and therefore there's a kind of spillover effect where the kind of non-liberal attitudes in one area spill over into other areas as well. Now, trying to break down this effect into the different sub-indices of the Fundamental Rights Index is an interesting area. It really helps that the sub-indices are actually not very much more volatile than the aggregate index. That was a problem we encountered with our economic freedom study last year. So we were able to apply broadly the same approach and get reasonable results. So if we just fast forward to what we found, basically EU membership assists in the embedding of political freedom across all three of the channels we looked at: access to justice, civil liberties, and indeed social rights. Access to justice was probably the most active of those in terms of just the volume of statistical effects. It was very clear that EU accession was correlated with a closing of the freedom gap across all three channels. Now, what we also found when we looked at the interplay between the jurisdiction of the European Court of Human Rights and the jurisdiction of the EU institutions was that there's almost like an unspoken distribution of labor with the European Court of Human Rights focusing its impact much more on the civil liberties side, and the EU institutions channeling their impact more on social rights and access to justice. And that partly is a direct result of how the European Court of Human Rights works, the fact that basically can bypass state capacity because it invites or accepts individual applications and cases. We also found that of the three dimensions of political freedom, civil liberties interact very strongly with politics. So you tend to find that having a center-right or right-wing government is associated with lower performance in that axis. So I guess coming to the end of this part of the presentation, there's a lot of work we can still look at. I think the most important area of focus is to try to understand causal links. As with our previous study of last year, this one is not optimally designed to point to causality. So this will always be a limitation. There's also, especially when we try to draw conclusions in relation to political influences on freedom, we still need to do a fair amount of extra work to understand what exactly causes that impact, whether we're looking at mechanical effects or kind of spillover effects of the kind I described earlier. So all of this is work for another day. My colleagues and I look forward to revisiting this topic. But for now, I think it's safe to say this study, tells us something we had hoped to find, but could not be certain of, that EU accession is associated with better performance in terms of political rights, and gives us some kind of handle into why the recent deterioration has taken place. With that, I think I'll take a break and hand back to the panel.
Thank you very much. Thank you for this very interesting indeed presentation. And now we can pass on to our very interesting panel discussion. Today we have the honor to host a panel of distinguished guests. We have Sarka Pratt, who is director at the Institute for Politics and Society in the Czech Republic. We have Bichan Sahin, who is a professor for political science in the Department of Political Science and Public Administration at Hacettepe University in Ankara and chairman of Freedom Research Association. Gregory Valianatos, vice president of political party Liberal Alliance, journalist and human rights activist and member of KEFiM's advisory board. Nana Kalandace, program manager in the Regional Europe program at the International Institute for Democracy and Electoral Assistance, and Emmanuel Schizas. So first of all, I would like each one of our panelists for their introductory remarks and a comment on the current state of political freedom based on the study findings and what Mr. Schizas has presented to us just now. Mr. Pratt, would you like to start?
Sure, thank you. Thank you very much for a kind introduction. Good afternoon, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great honor and a pleasure for me to have the opportunity to address you on the occasion of launching these fascinating studies produced by KEFiM and the European Liberal Forum. I am of the same mind as the authors, particularly on the part where they stress that human rights, individual and civil liberties have been the foundation pillar of modern societies and have been always embedded in the liberal democratic regimes. In politically free countries, citizens enjoy a full democracy, which includes freedom to form opposition groups and to compete for public offices. Unfortunately, we are increasingly witnessing that this is not the case in many countries, those attempting to join the EU, but also, and perhaps even more concerningly, the present members of the European Union. We have seen frequent incidents of government abuse of power, restrictions of academic and media freedom, and in some cases, even suppression of civil and individual liberties. These violations seriously question European Union's ability to stand for its fundamental values. And we need to ask ourselves, what needs to be done and what needs to be avoided to return to the EU back on track. Please allow me now to briefly introduce the history of political freedom in the EU context. Fundamental rights and freedoms are principles that have long been sidelined in the construction of Europe. The EU was originally an organization with economic competencies. The Maastricht Treaties and Article 2 of the Treaty on the European Union ensure the principles of respect for human dignity, freedom, democracy, equality, the rule of law, and respect for human rights, including the rights of persons belonging to minorities. As Europe has grown, accessioning different countries, the issue of political freedom has become essential. That being said, what is the level of political freedom in the countries applying to join the EU? There's no simple answer to this question because each country's situation is unique and requires a unique assessment. Although the direction of all accessioning states is clear and is one, each candidate has its own pace, its own specificities, and therefore should be considered under nuanced conditions. We have seen particularly difficult talks with Turkey's accession. Turkey applied for EU membership in 1987 and have since been trying to join the Union. Nevertheless, under the current leadership in Turkey, the negotiations will most likely stay frozen. The Western Balkans have been prioritized for membership since emerging from war during the breakup of Yugoslavia in the 1990s. Albania, Montenegro, North Macedonia, and Serbia are all recognized as official candidates and in negotiation. Difficulties can be expected also in talks between the EU and Kosovo, which is often referred to as a partner rather than state. This reflects that Kosovo is only partially recognized as a state and the European Commission is extremely sensitive to the issue. At some point, it might be necessary to acknowledge that enlargement has its limits and the EU cannot expand endlessly. Nonetheless, all these candidate states are currently in a process of reforms that involve changes in favor of political freedom. And this is what the presented study shows very well, that the EU accession process and the increase of political freedom are correlated. The EU membership criteria, known as the Copenhagen criteria, must be met by all candidates for accession. Before joining the EU, the states must implement reforms that guarantee political freedom and the rule of law. In the sense, as the authors point out very well, it can be said that EU accession increases political freedom in the candidate countries. However, a distinction must be made between EU accession as a process that involves increasing political freedoms and EU policy. The EU adopts in some cases economic policies that may have a negative effect on political freedoms in the member states. A common policy is felt differently in different countries of the Union. Therefore, specific characteristics of each state influence the country's position on political freedom. As already mentioned, the EU is facing many difficulties of both internal and external nature. The recent economic and migration crisis, as well as the rise of populism and authoritarianism across several European countries, are factors threatening political freedom. These trends require an adequate response, and I look forward to our continuing discussion regarding the available options. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for this very nice introduction. I think you said pretty much what the situation is in all candidate countries currently. And before I continue, I would like to remind, I forgot to mention it before, that all our attendees and all who are watching us via Facebook, they can send us any questions they have and we can ask our panelists. Now, Mr. Bijan Shahin.
Hello, everyone. And I would like to thank KEFiM and ELF for providing this opportunity to discuss on such a serious project. Let me start by stating that European Union has been a project of peace and prosperity in a devastated continent after two world wars. European Union project, of course, the name was not that at the beginning, emerged as an ideal, as a vision of peace and prosperity. And this project was based on basically two main pillars. On the one pillar, it was based on a free market economy, and on the other, it was based on a liberal democracy. And these pillars were translated into also criterions like Copenhagen criteria or Maastricht criteria, etc. So the countries that want to be part of this vision, applied for membership, for full membership, and they were expected to comply with this criteria to be part of this club, so to speak. And this study, this series academic study, also proves that there is a causal link between membership process and improving political liberties, political standards, or the standards of liberal democracy in the candidate country. With respect to study, I find it very satisfying, very well carried out. And this is a quantitative study. Maybe the next phase of this project can be qualitative studies. This quantitative study can be supported by follow-up qualitative studies. Candidates and member countries can be selected, and they can be focused more thoroughly about the process, how they became a member, and what kind of reforms they carried out, what were the failures, etc. Very shortly, if I may, I would love to touch upon Turkey's adventure with respect to this process. As Ms. Pratt indicated, Turkey applied for full membership in 1987 during Turgut Özal's prime ministership. And in 2005, Turkey was granted, or the negotiations started officially. In 1999, Turkey was granted candidacy, official candidacy, and 2005, the negotiations has started. In fact, it is safe to say that between 2000 and 2008, there were many reforms carried out in Turkey with a view to accession to European Union, to become full member. There were constitutional amendments, there were many reform packages, for example, the abolition of death penalty and the easing of the ban on speaking Kurdish in Turkey, for example. All these were carried out with a view to become a full member. And Turkey's standards of democracy arose between 2000 and 2010, I can say. And Turkey was about to become a full democracy with reference to, for example, Freedom House's criteria. Before 2000s, Turkey was considered to be a semi-free country, half free, half not free. And between 2000 and 2010, thanks to all these reforms, there was very little space. I mean, with a little more effort, Turkey could have become a full democracy in 2010s. However, things have changed dramatically in Turkey, as you know. There are, of course, many reasons for that, and I have my own explanations for that, but we do not have time at the moment to discuss all these things. From 2010 onwards, Turkey began to decline, and also accession talks were stalled around 2008, 2009. So there is also this correlation. After the stopping of the negotiations between Turkey and EU, Turkey's decline also got more speed. So I think this case study, of course, it's a single case study, but definitely lends support to the research carried out by our distinguished scholars here. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you very much. We will definitely come back to Turkey's case. We know how much we love to discuss Turkey, both in Greece and in Europe, especially these days. One of our most interesting topics. So now, Mr. Valianatos.
Well, thank you very much for the invitation. I have been following closely civil liberties for about 45 years in this country, and for the last 20 years as part of the Liberal Party, since it wasn't there before that. Now, I'm going to use about 15 examples to deal with pinning down both political freedom and civil liberties. Let me start. I remember my Dutch friends when Greece entered the European Union saying that they were horrified that the standards of liberties would go down because they knew what happened in this country. Mind you, a few years before that, we were going out of a junta regime, of a fascist regime, with no liberties and freedoms. Now, the family law was the one who was most influenced by the adhesion. You know, Greece had adultery or dowry by these years, and there was a major reform to bring Greece up to the standards of Europe. Migration, I might say, is one issue that we'd like to see now. Greece is one of the entrances of the European Union, supposedly carrying out the policy of Europe, which is not the case. Greece now is doing illegal pushing backs, refoulement, and the situation and the possibility for migrants and refugees to go into Europe, or indeed the integration and not the assimilation of the country, has great problems. We have a Minister of Migration who every day that is giving a press conference is committing crimes by saying what he's saying, to my knowledge and belief. Now, let's see the Roma case, Roma in Greece and Roma in Europe. I think that whichever country has succeeded in getting these people in regular education has made a huge progress. Greece is not the case. Religions. Greece is a heavily religious country, is a predominantly Greek Orthodox. This is the beginning of the constitution. The church is intervening to a great extent in political life and indeed in education and public life and public speech. Drugs. I'm wondering, and I know that in various countries, the right to take drugs and all the rights of other people that want to get out of this problem is in a dramatic situation. I know that there's countries like Spain or the Czech Republic or Sweden or Swiss that are much better. Greece has not solved this problem. There's a huge, huge problem with drugs in this country. Sex work. Now, Greece is one of the leading countries in freedoms on sex work. Sex work, you know, is the reason why trafficking is a huge problem. I believe that whenever there is a freedom of self-doing what, sex work is work. And whenever this is liberated, things are much better with mafia and all this crime. Now, nationalism, of course, is a problem. I refer to national minorities. You know, in Greece, there is not even a Turkish minority. I know that there is, but I'm saying what the official state is saying. The European Court of Human Rights is definitely stating that there is. There is a Tsam minority, there is all sorts of minorities in Greece. There is a Vlach minority, there is a Macedonian minority. Oh, what did I say? Now, I think that there is a lot to be done in this. We see other countries like Spain have problems with the nationalities and national minorities. Anti-Semitism is a problem. We see distractions in cemeteries, and we see a large populist vocabulary and way of dealing with news and conspiracy theories and what have you. Prisons in this country is not a chapter that one should be very happy to discuss about. I think that in Europe things get better, but definitely the European Court of Human Rights is playing a great role in solving problems. Now, LGBT. I've been lucky last year to conclude the pan-European study, which was dealt with homo evolution and Greek statistics firm. You know that LGBT rights are observed in Europe, and they are progressing to a certain extent. We see countries like Poland and Hungary going way back. And we see, on the other hand, a general suggestion that things go faster, that there is civil marriage, and that there is a sort of equality, which is not very close. Now, with death penalty, I think we abolished it, and in most countries, voting rights, I think this is a question that is much better. Homelessness is a problem that we have to address. I chair the Confederation of Organizations dealing with homelessness in this country. In this country, there was an idea that property is a huge percentage of the population, and now that because of the crisis and you have lost this property, there's a lot of homeless people, and now we're dealing with new programs, and we take as examples the ways that we deal with refugees and migrants in this country. In the way that we should work for refugees and migrants, this is the way we're going to work with homeless in this country. Now, stigma, I guess, is a problem that deals with all minorities and differences, from HIV people to all kinds of others. And we have to work in a very consistent way. Now, I guess I have been through various categories. For Greece, the accession to Europe is an accession to freedom. There is always a way for civil rights activists to refer to European Convention of Human Rights. There is a long way to go, but I guess unless we monitor in details all these aspects, unless this is in our programs, this is in our liberal agenda, we're not going to answer in the way we know, in the good way, things that any left politician has reached a stop, has reached an end. I guess that we can argue, and I'm always arguing, that unless you know economy, unless you can go about business, you end up in a whole totalitarian regime, and there is no way out for left people. I guess this is a list that I would open discussion coming from the audience. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you very much for your comments. You said many prohibited usually words like Macedonian and Tholman. Anyways,
I tell you, let me add. I'm for 30 years banned from Facebook because I was supporting a hunger strike criminal, a terrorist, considered terrorist by Facebook. Now I'm not allowed. This isn't on Friday. I'm not allowed to write or comment on that. And my only remark to them was when I was about people who were were fascists, and I was writing something, people who have been killed, they never banned me. So there is a difference. It is important to say that for someone who is considered a left terrorist, there was a ban. For someone who was a right terrorist, there wasn't. Thank you.
Interesting. Now going to Mrs. Kalandache, sorry.
Thank you, Nectaria. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Right, yes. Well, first of all, very glad to join this forum by KEFiM and by the European Liberal Forum. This is, I must say, this is my first time actually very closely understanding the work of KEFiM and the European Liberal Forum. And it's exciting to see and to hear all these discussions. we and many of our colleagues at International IDEA have read the study with a great interest, and we will continue to examine it, from its very rich findings. So International IDEA is an intergovernmental organization, International Institute for Democracy and Electoral Assistance, that has launched this flagship index in a way that we're so glad to see that KEFiM and the authors of the study have found to be relevant and suitable for shaping the variables of the study. One of the probably the most important objectives why the index was developed in 2017, first time, was indeed to contribute to studies, to seeking the evidence, promoting evidence-based knowledge and discussions in Europe, around the globe. Second sort of aspect, or the related aspect of that, is that with this index, the Institute wanted to contribute to the existing set of measures, right, on democracy, but contributed with the one that would consider, in a way, thicker definition of democracy, would be based on a larger range of sources. And I think this is what seems to have worked, or at least seems to have convinced you in the decision to use the index and the part of the index for your study. I also need to say, and if there are fellows and friends listening from other organizations that produce the data that index uses, I think this needs to be understood and said very loudly, that IDEA constructed the index using the rich data sets produced by other organizations. This is Varieties of Democracy and other databases. So about 70% of the data comes from BDEM, and the rest from other more particular databases. And we are absolutely delighted to have this sort of partnership. Second point, and this will maybe sort of relate to my follow-up points, is that at the Institute we develop indexes, and there's a department that I don't work with, but closely follow their work, that develops the index that you've so nicely utilized in your work. But we also in a way, first and foremost, do this type of work to then understand better the factors that contribute to democratic consolidation, may help us understand better the reasons for democratic breakdowns or deconsolidation, backsliding, and essentially may help us and others that work in the democracy promotion assistance community to develop better responses. And so, of course, we all come in to this discussion from our own angles. Of course, we also have shared objectives in discussing and learning about state of democracy, but from the individual sort of angle that I come in, which is working with organizations, various stakeholders, particularly in the accession countries, and nowadays, of course, also trying to engage more with not only accession countries, but the member state countries where we see most declines. So from that perspective, the study is extremely enlightening and interesting and rich. I mean, I've read it twice. I'll have to reread it a few times. But from what it looks like, the two interesting points, I mean, all of it is, again, I need to underscore, is very interesting. But so I noted that, you mentioned that, for example, well, first of all, I need to say that it is surprising to me, but in a way encouraging still, as the result of the study, that there was and there is ever a doubt behind the main sort of the finding, right? The finding that you've once again established, right, that there is a correlation, and that proximity, the progress towards the EU accession does indeed close gaps or help close gaps on fundamental freedoms and civil liberties. But what is insightful is to see what are the channels through which this happens. And I think this is particularly the areas where we'll be taking very close read. So you noted that access to justice is one of the areas, right, where the engagement of these factors is particularly close, and I think that is well, in a way, a reminder and important notice to be taken on by European Union institutions itself, and also all stakeholders that are engaged in democratic strengthening, that the areas and the institutions that we assess under access to justice are such an important sort of locus to continue the work on. As idea, for example, we prioritize one of our directions access to electoral justice, or the performance and the strengthening of electoral justice institutions. The other area that I found interesting was that you did mention that there was in a way an informal a division of labor, or the impact that the European Court of Human Rights seems to be having in all this. And clearly, again, another reminder, and then the confirmation that more needs to be done to make sure that citizens in accession countries, citizens in member states are well informed, are really well aware of the instruments that the convention provides for, are informed of the mechanisms through which the convention can be used, that civic education in this area is meaningful and works properly. Of course, also something that we don't work directly on, but again, insight from the study, that there needs to be more and more done to make sure that the backlogs at the European Court of Human Rights are diminished, and that there is a good level of effort at the level of the national member states for the enforcement and implementation of the rulings of the European Court of Human Rights. I think I still have a few more minutes, so there I would like to focus on 2 or 3 lessons that that I could share from our practical work of democracy assistance, particularly in the accession countries. And Italia, I noted some of the questions that I think we are all here to address, which is, for example, what areas should be focused on, what areas should be emphasized in the work in democracy strengthening in the accession countries that you posed in your event description. So one is, of course, we've heard so much about what is EU doing in the past years to improve its toolbox to protect and uphold the rule of law in its member states in a better and a more effective way. And of course, we've heard and know the emphasis that I think has been placed on combining both the soft measures and the hard measures, the preventative measures and the enforcement measures. And I think, once again, perhaps this is an opportunity to underscore this, that from the practical work on some of the accession countries, I've personally come to see the evidence of how indeed important it is to have just sufficient amount of preventative measures and engagements before we get into the situations of real sort of severe backsliding, and of course in the cases of the member states. Now, we at IDEA always say, and I think this is another opportunity again to underscore that democracy cannot be imported from the outside, that it needs to be nurtured, it needs to be supported from the inside. Well, one of the I think how this supports the protagonists or the supporters of the soft measures is indeed that very often with the initiation of the hard measures, we often see how at least some important parts of the segments of the population in these countries tend to perceive these measures from the EU as not necessarily against their governments, but against them themselves. And this further exacerbates the situation and exacerbates some of the anti-European Union or Eurosceptic views. So that I think is an important element that we need to, as all democracy supporters, need to realize and implement better. Last thing I'm going to say, and maybe sort of more prosaic or more sort of daily observations that we have is, and again, this cannot be overemphasized, is really the ability or the need for the European Union and the institutions to do more in order to enable the organizations that work on democracy support within member states, local grassroots groups, individuals, and sort of groups that work for sort of for the protection of civil liberties, to have access to literally to the resources that they need for this work. Very often what we hear in our work is that it is more difficult. It is easier to find, to get the, for example, the funding from the Norwegian Democracy and Human Rights Fund for organizations, say in Poland or in other member states, to work on really the core civil liberties issues and political rights issues than it is to get the EU funds, and that this is a real problem, and that we see the challenges that are associated with the lack of resources as one of the reasons why not a higher degree of resistance from the civil society is put up when we see the sort of the authoritarian tendencies starting up to show in the member states. I think that's what I want to maybe sort of stop at, and yeah, look forward to if there are questions or more interactions with the author and the other panelists.
Thank you very much. Mr. Schizas, would you like to add anything on the comments we've already heard?
I think it's a very rich set of comments, and you'll have noticed in the background I'm also picking up some of the interesting questions in chat. I think the only thing I would add is just I very much welcome the kind of qualitative case study led approach that other panelists have either recommended or even demonstrated live here. There's a limit to what you can do with brute force analysis of data, and people generally want meaning and they want stories. And one of the things that the EU suffers from these days is good narratives. There's the lack of good narratives. So I certainly welcome that advice, and I'm sure colleagues in KEFiM will be quite receptive. So I would leave it at that, and maybe hand back to you and to the rest of the panel.
Thank you. I can see that there are already some questions coming up, so please go ahead and I will ask the questions to the panelists. I would like to ask with one question I was meaning to ask along those lines, Ms. Pratt. Could you tell us a bit more about the Czech case, about how the Czech Republic was benefited by its participation in the European Union regarding its political freedom, and what's the current situation in the country?
Yes, thank you for the question. It's very interesting. Well, when the Czech Republic became independent from the USSR in 1989, it began the post-communist transition, and the country turned to liberalism and a market economy. However, the country lagged behind Western European countries, I would say even significantly. Thus, joining the EU in 2004 was a way to put the Czech Republic on the same level as other countries in the region in economic, political, and social terms. But however, when the Charter of Fundamental Rights was created in 2007, the Czech Republic and its former president Václav Klaus requested a derogation status for the Czech Republic, and the president feared the charter could be used as a legal basis to challenge the Beneš decrees and lead to the restitution of property belonging to the expropriated Sudeten Germans at the end of the Second World War. And the text of the derogation was drafted as an additional protocol to the Lisbon Treaty, and it was ratified by all member states, including the Czech Republic. However, the ratification process was blocked in the Czech Republic in 2012 with the Social Democratic majority in the Senate. Thus, the derogation never entered into force. Rather, it had a symbolic value. And in 2014, Prime Minister, at that time it was Bohuslav Sobotka, announced that the Czech Republic will not use the derogation from the application of the Charter of Fundamental Rights of the Lisbon Treaty in the future. So in this case, it becomes clear that EU accession is not always a systematic factor in guaranteeing political freedoms, and states can act in this area. And the history of the country and the political and social features of the Czech Republic have led the president to have a reluctant attitude towards the Charter of Fundamental Rights. And this doesn't mean that the Czech Republic was going backwards in terms of political freedom. However, the rejection of the Charter was a symbolic act against fundamental rights and freedoms. Nevertheless, World Justice Project publishes each year a report on the rule of law in the world, and out of 128 countries surveyed in 2020, the Czech Republic was 18. So on the 18th place, so it's among the best performing EU countries. And according to Freedom House, which publishes an annual global report on political rights and civil liberties, the Czech Republic is a democracy in which political rights and civil liberties are generally respected. And the electoral framework is strong and generally well implemented by the National Election Commission. Freedom of the press is guaranteed, although concerns remain about the extent to which the media is controlled by business figures and its impact. Freedom House also notes that religious freedom is guaranteed and the judiciary is largely independent. Political parties can form freely and the opposition is present in parliament as well. So these results are difficult to interpret. It's difficult to know whether it's EU accession that has enabled the Czech Republic to score well. But Freedom House explains that there are unequal laws, policies and practices among certain segments of the population. For example, Roma lacks political representation and face discrimination in the labor market. So despite an anti-discrimination law, which was passed in 2009, or a good example are the women pay gap, or like women remain underrepresented in politics and public bodies in general. And according to the report published by the European Commission last year, the Czech Republic is among the countries with the highest gender pay gap. We also have kind of problem with anti-Islam and anti-migration attitudes, which have increased following the 2015 migration crisis. And the creation of the extreme right-wing political party led by Tomio Okamura, the party is SPD, which supports these feelings of rejection. It didn't make it better, and the SPD uses populistic anti-migration and anti-Muslim rhetorics. However, the political scientist and researcher at the Center for Social Science Research in Prague explains that the number of people who claim to be Muslim in the Czech Republic is very small, and they are either converts or people who are very well placed socially. They're like diplomats or people who come to the Czech Republic for work, for example, from Saudi Arabia. So this leads to a lack of understanding of what Islam is in general, and fears of what a rise in Islam in the Czech Republic might be represent. And maybe I can mention LGBT, but I don't think that we have any big issue regarding the LGBT here. It's not a topic. People are people. Homosexuality in the Czech Republic was decriminalized in 1961. And yeah, it's not like the problem here.
I see. Thank you very much for the answer. Now a question for Bican Sahin. I would like to ask to tell us a bit more. I would like you to tell us a bit more about the current situation in Turkey. If there is something that the EU could do in terms of political freedom there, and your opinion on whether the carrot and stick policy that the EU is supposedly following effective. And bringing back a question that Mr. Kaddik mentioned before, I wanted to understand if is the EU worth its membership? What's the opinion of the Turks? What do you think?
Thank you so much. As I touched upon in my introductory remarks, Turkey has been declining in the democratic front. Now, Turkey is considered to be an unfree country in the Freedom House's index. And in 2017, Turkey switched to a presidential government system, as you may know. Previously, Turkey was conducting a parliamentary system as a government system. And with the presidential system, Turkey lacks checks and balances to a great extent. I mean, originally, a presidential system is a democratic government system as it is implemented in the United States of America. Despite its weaknesses, overall, it's a democratic government system. However, as it is designed in Turkey, it is not conducive to consolidate rule of law or protect human rights because it lacks the basics of a free government, which is checks and balances. What can European Union do to promote things in Turkey? Does carrot and stick policy work? Sometimes works, sometimes it backfires, of course. I mean, Turkey, unfortunately, also has a card in its hand, this refugee card, and it seems that it works pretty well vis-a-vis European Union's policymakers. That is, Turkey can be induced by some positive incentives like restarting of negotiations, and also there is customs union between Turkey and European Union, and it needs to be updated. And there can be some conditionalities, but positive conditionalities, that is encouraging Turkish government to improve so that this customs union will be updated according to new needs. Because economy hurts. In recent years, Turkish economy is not performing well. And also in the new political system, in the new government system, Mr. Erdogan needs to gather 50+1% of the votes to stay in power. So, and as you know, it's a general fact all over the world, when the economy is bad, you cannot gather this much vote. And still Turkey our election system is still performing well, let's say, not perfect, but still well. So it is not easy to steal an election in Turkey. So he needs to get 50+1. And to do that, he needs a good economy. And European Union's perspective of about custom union may work. So this can be a good thing. Was there any other? There was also another question in the chat box. Should I also reply to that question very quickly?
Sure. Please go ahead. About the LGBT community.
Yes, yeah. Sociologically speaking, Turkey is a big country, and there is heterogeneity in the country. That is, in the big cities, in the Western cities, it is much easier for an LGBT person to express himself, her identity, his identity as an LGBT person, like in Istanbul or in Izmir or in Ankara. But it would be much more difficult to express openly their identity in, let's say, in the interior parts of the country as you go towards the east, which is more conservative, which is more rural. But in terms of political treatment of LGBT people, there is definitely deterioration. In recent years, unfortunately, for example, Pride Walk has been banned in Turkey. Previously, LGBT people were able to walk. The Pride Walk happened in Turkey, but in recent years, they are banned, unfortunately. So there is this kind of deterioration as well in Turkey.
Mm-hmm. I see. And I would like to understand if you think that the Turks are interested in EU membership.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, okay. So that's a good part of the question. I missed that one. When Turkey's negotiations with EU started back in 2005, there was very big support on the part of the public, general public. But over the years, this unfortunately declined. This support declined. I do not know exact figures right now, but I think it is less than 50%. Most people think that European Union has double standards and Turkey will never be accepted, even if Turkey achieves standards. There is such a perception, unfortunately, in Turkey. Some European leaders might have helped for this. Also, Turkish government has some blame on its hands, but that's the situation, unfortunately.
I see. Mr. Valianatos, I see a question for you in the chat box. Would it be realistic to expect gay rights betterment during the current right-wing government? And I would like to add to that, we have seen in Greece recently that the debate about the same-sex marriages has reopened, I think only to close again very quickly. What is your current view about LGBT rights in Greece? Has there been an improvement, and do you expect an improvement?
Well, the reasonable answer is no under Conservative government. Having said that, the Prime Minister has set up a commission and he has put in there his LGBT advisors and members of civil society that are meant to come by the end of June with a project within 2 years of the perfect equality. Now, as you know, some assaults are part of Greek political life. Left is notorious. Kolotumba is the international term for that. I wish the right-wing government is performing a wonderful somersault and we see equality. You know, equality is pushed by the European Union too, and it's about high time. There is no reason why it shouldn't happen.
And what do you think about the rest of Europe? How do you see developments in Hungary and Poland? We've seen that the Polish and the Hungarian government have acted to further restrict same-sex couples' rights. How do you see the EU's reaction? Has it been adequate?
No, the reaction of the European Union is shy. I think that with time, speed should be gathered. And I think that there is a way, if people are reporting every day, if people are invited in other countries from Hungary, if there is always in the media some news about oppression, if there is publicity, if people can speak out, then things can change. Sanctions is the last measure, which are foreseen.
Yeah, so you think that sanctions can actually make a difference, especially in these cases, right?
This is the last measure I can think of. There is a lot more to be done. I don't think that there is, I mean, I have never heard of, say, Greek Prime Minister mentioning that, unless there is a coordination of efforts, and there is a lot to be done. I mean, there is a simple speak out of other countries on making statements or making judgments or inviting or encouraging. You know, there is countries that have been through difficulties. I mean, Greece is not the country that has solved the problems, but at least someone could speak up about the way that things become easier with time, stating difficulties which have been overseen.
Thank you very much. Ms. Kalandatz, a question again from the audience. How could the European Union help countries with democratic deficit in Europe's periphery? It's mentioning Russia and Belarus, since there is no competence in these areas.
Yes, thank you for that question. Indeed, yeah, I think that's where we also as an institute are quite active, for Russia, where generally engagement with civil society, well, you know, same with Belarus too, engagement with civil society is of course very limited, very dangerous for people that are engaged from their side, and you know, all the sort of repressive measures that we know take place. But how can the EU help? Well, of course, EU has been in a way reminded, and you know, I think there are many helpful advocacy processes taking place, engaging the European Union to make the action towards these countries and deteriorating countries more political, more conditional, more strategic regarding the attainment of certain basic improvements when it comes to the situation of the human rights defenders, election observers, you know, access to some basic transparency measures. Of course, you know, we've seen a lot of this covered in the media in the recent months vis-a-vis Belarus. EU is doing, I personally think, a lot, and quite unprecedented compared to the past sort of standard approaches vis-a-vis Belarus. Right now, EU is now investing a lot of effort to document and make it available and formally available and in a way usable in legal terms, the evidence perpetrated by Belarusian regime against the human rights defenders and protesters. I think that is an unprecedented measure. I will, you know, the list is very long. Well, of course, you know, with Russia, it's a bit of a different situation with the sanctions and with the internal sort of lack of that sort of ideal consensus internally within the EU that one would want to see on vis-a-vis the Russia that we see more and more on vis-a-vis Belarus. Yeah, I think that's in the given timeline. That's what the answer. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And a question for Mr. Schizas, I can see from the chat box. What would you say for the overall EU's policy on refugees? Is it right, Turkey and Greece, to lift the whole burden and Orban to shut Hungary's borders down? And I know that you mentioned the refugees who is linked with political freedoms in the research, but I would like also what do you think the impact, or what do you see the impact on political freedoms of the refugee crisis in Greece?
Absolutely. So look, I think the it goes a little bit outside my knowledge and competence to give you a full answer, and so others will have to come in. But what I would say is, the part of this is a function of geography. So, who gets to shut the borders down depends on what the actual access routes into Europe are. And if you happen to be at the border of Europe, then it's hard to get yourself into a situation without significant kind of institutional reform and significant consensus amongst the member states, where you're not actually the person holding the baby, or as it were, kind of holding the door shut. So it's that part, I think, has less to do with the EU's kind of record in embedding political freedoms or fundamental rights, and more to do with the actual circumstances. I think we should also just be a little bit realistic with regards to how the EU achieves consensus on things, or reaches decisions. I would often wish that someone in Brussels could bang a steel gauntleted arm on a table and kind of make sure that some things like that could be resolved. But that's not the kind of institutional power that member states have signed up for. And there is some wisdom to that. Now, it does result in some things that liberals would deeply abhor, and I find myself in the same situation. So, sort of not to completely answer this directly, but I think we're dealing with some institutional limitations that exist for a reason, not just because people have ill will, but because you can only push consensus so far.
Thank you very much. I would also like...
May I add to that?
Sure, that's what I was going to ask.
Sorry. Shall I expect that you ask me, or should I go on?
No, please go ahead.
I think that for any liberal, the first thing to have in mind is that we work on peace. Liberals should be mobilized to work for international peace and to stop the wars that cause this pain, this anomaly, this war. Now, having said that, there is no way why we should justify the bad way we treat people who come in. There is rules. Greece, Spain, Italy, everyone should have in mind, bear in mind that they perform the European policy and not the national policy. Now, having said that, I think we're all very comfortable on paying Turkey to host 4 million people. Now, in other times, European industry, European economy, liberal ideology wishes that people come and go. And in theory, European industries and countries, rich countries, were prepared to import millions of migrants and refugees, which in one way or another come and go. Now, tension will go if we have a hierarchy in dealing with these values. Peace is the first, and we should mobilize our parties, ourselves, our friends, our governments, the European Union, to work in a more positive way in that. And then we should be ready to share the goods of the globe. I know that there is natural catastrophes. Now we have COVID, parenthesis. There should be a discussion on political freedom, on how we deal in the post-COVID era when it comes, because it will be a long time. What is freedom for people who are denying drugs, denying vaccines, denying people who say, you're not supposed to tell me what you tell me. It's an issue. I leave it there. I go back to refugees. We have a certain experience in Europe. We should see when we create ghettos, we shouldn't. We see better examples that people mix and mingle. We see societies that migrants and refugees are thriving. We have excellent examples that play all around the world. We should stick to the positive examples. no, if Greece, of course, Europe is not a place that everybody can come and go. There is rules, but we should stick to the rules and not apply different rules now that there is some problems. We are for freedom, and freedom is for everyone, and rules, the rule of law. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Sahin, I don't know if you would like to add something, because the question was about Turkey, and I don't know how much the way EU is treating the refugee crisis and is treating Turkey and the people it's hosting has played a role in terms of how positive the Turks are towards the EU.
Yeah, I can add a little bit on that. This is also not my area of expertise, but we can say that, you know, hosting 4 million people has quite a big bill. And, you know, if the European countries are not willing to open their borders and to co-host these refugees, at least they should be helping with the cost of hosting these people and helping them. That would be quite helpful. But so far, European Union seems to underperformed on that regard. And there is another question in the chat box asking me about the Turkish economy and
how has the Turkish economy been affected by the loss of soft power due to the recent actions of the country? Yes, please go ahead.
Yeah, of course, one reason Turkish economy is going badly is the refugee crisis. It has a great burden on the economy. That's definitely one reason, but it is not the only reason. In my view, a bigger reason is the lack of rule of law and trust, especially in the eyes of the investors. In Turkey, in the past 5-6 years, rule of law has been deteriorating greatly. Ms. Pratt mentioned the World Justice Index. Turkey performs very poorly in that. Out of 120-30 countries or so, Turkey ranks around 116th, 17th. And this was a great deterioration, because like 5 years ago, Turkey was ranking around 55, 60. So as we all know, as liberals, when there is no rule of law in a country, there is no economic freedom. And when there is no economic freedom, there cannot be investment, there cannot be economic growth. Turkey is suffering from that. There are so many personal interventions by Mr. Erdogan, for example, into economy. Institutions were eroded, like central bank, for example. Turkish central bank had been strengthened back in early 2000s after Turkey had a great economic shock in early 2001. But after that, with the structural reforms, Turkish economy stood up again, and central bank was very influential in that, because it had autonomy, and Turkey brought down its hyperinflation under control, thanks to the autonomy of central bank. But nowadays, Mr. Erdogan just directly interfering with the operations of the bank. He is changing the presidents just, you know, in a midnight decree, for example, and then all of a sudden you see the inflation rate skyrocketing in Turkey, and Turkish lira is devaluating very rapidly. These are what I can say with respect to this question.
Thank you very much. So now question for Ms. Pratt and Ms. Kaladace, if she wants to add after. I would like your opinion on how can the EU institutions intervene to protect individual freedom in countries where we see that they experience basically an authoritarian shift, like basically Hungary's case, for example. And also I would like to raise a question that you raised in your opening remarks. You said that at some point we might have to acknowledge that enlargement has its limits. And I was wondering if you think that the EU is close to that point, actually.
Thank you for the questions. I will start with Hungary, for example, because in 2020, the government constitutionally banned adoption of or by LGBT persons. But we can also use the example of Poland, when in 2020, the Constitutional Court restricted access to abortion. And furthermore, Hungary and Poland lowered the retirement age of judges in their respective constitutional courts in violation of the EU principle of judicial independence and non-discrimination on the basis of age. And when we look at the World Justice Project that has established the Rule of Law Index in 2020, according to the results over the 5 past years, the countries with the largest annual percentage declines were, Egypt and Cambodia, but also there is a Hungary. And the most significant decline in scores over the past 5 years has been in Egypt and Poland on constraints on government power, with an average annual decline. I think in Egypt it was minus 8.5, and in Poland it was 6.8%. And I think the EU still has some mechanism what they can do. And it's, for example, the EU accession to the European Convention on Human Rights. All EU states are members of the Council of Europe, but the EU is not. And if this were the case, EU citizens would be able to challenge legal acts adopted by the Union before the European Court of Human Rights. And negotiations have been ongoing since 2013, and the next meeting is scheduled to take place from 29 June to 2nd July 2021. And the objectives of accessions are to close gaps in union law, to put the EU on an equal footing with its member states with regard to external control by the court, and to ensure harmony in the protection of fundamental rights in Europe, and to ensure EU participation in the procedure before the court, and making the rule of law part of the multi-annual financial framework would also be one of the mechanisms. And I believe in December 2020, the Parliament approved an agreement with the Council on legislation to put in place a mechanism that allows the EU to stop funding governments that fail to respect the rule of law. And under the new regulation, payments from the EU budget can be withheld for countries where proven violations of the rule of law undermine the management of EU funds. And the new regulation applies to all EU funds from 1st January 2021. However, this measure is being challenged by, again, Poland and Hungary, who have filed a complaint with the European Court of Justice. And the two countries have been at odds with the EU for years over accusations their governments have been eroding judicial and media independence. But the EU has created also a European Magnitsky Law in 2020 to sanction natural or legal persons, whether state or non-state, who have violated human rights. And this tool allows the EU to intervene to protect freedom in countries experiencing authoritarian shift, not only in the EU, but internationally. And until now, the EU could mainly impose sectoral and territorial sanctions, for example, against the nuclear industry in Iran. And they were therefore directed against specific countries. And the European Magnitsky Act proposes to introduce sanctions against persons and entities responsible for or involved in serious human rights violations. And compared to the global regime already in force, this new weapon makes it possible to adapt sanctions and to dissociate states from the perpetrators of these condemned acts. Thus, they will be able to target individuals through the world, even if the acts are not committed in their country of origin. And this new tool should enable the Union to act more quickly and effectively in the event of serious violations of its values.
Thank you very much. Ms. Kalantache.
Yes, maybe a few additions from my side to what Sarka has outlined in a very comprehensive way. So when it comes to, I guess the question could concern the both members and the non-members. When it comes to members, obviously it's a complex issue of jurisdiction and the procedure and the decision making within the EU. And you know, given the debate that's going on which routes to take, how to combine the soft and the hard measures. I think there is probably good reason and basis to consider and sort of think out of the box on really thinking what other than formal and sort of highly complex formal decisions. Before that, what informal and what sort of more dynamic monitoring measures EU can do. And we know a few examples that were considered but declined at the end, arguing that the Commission did not have the basis. But I think that there's that opportunity there to resist these types of sort of backlash and the criticism, and really move on in a creative and determined way to seek the opportunities for early monitoring, early consultations from with the member state cases. When it comes to the non-members, of course, I think the range is broader somewhat. And again, I think it really starts with early on engagement and early on monitoring and understanding what are the important critical signs of forthcoming deterioration. I think one thing that we notice from practice is that things that really are sometimes difficult to sort of pinpoint and are maybe perhaps less tangible, but only become starkly clear during the electoral processes. For example, the campaign that was extremely problematic and tainted in Serbia in 2020, the way how, of course, Albania's pre-election and the whole electoral reform process, electoral administration process has been tainted by polarization and radicalization and boycotts. I mean, of course, it's a member state, but the Polish electoral experience last year has also been suggestive of a broader area of deterioration than those that we thought we knew, right? I mean, drawing in the core of the clean elections and the freedom of political parties to campaign. So with the non-members, again, going back to the issue, I think there as well, the monitoring needs to start earlier on. And I would once again take the opportunity to mention the role of achieving these measures, these objectives from within, working with the domestic actors, avoiding any appearance that these are the principles and the norms that are external and important from the European Union institutions, and where citizens have no control or no real ownership of this. These are core values that all of the countries on the European continent share and need to perceive as own local issues.
Thank you very much. Anyone else that would like to add anything on that? Mr. Schizas, what do you think? How can the EU better safeguard civil rights and democracy? Does it have the necessary tools?
Well, I don't think the recent experience has been that it has fantastic tools at its disposal. Like, it's one thing to have certain, a certain procedure on paper, and it's another one whether you can politically leverage it. And, in the standoff with Poland and Hungary, that was a very good example of where the process whereby the budget is decided was used as leverage against the tools that the EU allegedly had at its disposal. So you have to see these things in the round. And similarly, I think there's very, you need to go a step above procedure when there is an executive that is actually hell-bent on subverting, the rule of law. Otherwise, you're sort of like the Microsoft Word paperclip that says, it looks like you're writing a new law that will restrict freedoms. Would you like to reconsider? It's like that's not the conversation you're supposed to be having with these people. The question is power. Like, how much leverage can you exert against a member state? And, at the moment, I don't think the institutions are able to exert very much leverage. I still think it is difficult to advocate as a liberal for that kind of power to sit in Brussels. I'm not saying I wouldn't do it, but there's a tension there. You still want this to be a union of kind of sovereign states up to a certain point. But are we currently at the stage where the EU institutions have sufficient leverage to stop a member state that wants to subvert the rule of law or in a substantive way? No, I don't think they do.
Could an internal watchdog work? Could it help?
So I'll just take that because I was speaking last, but I think others may want to come in. To some extent, you already have access to tools like that, even at the first at the member state level and then at the EU level. But again, it's a question of how empowered they are. Like, if their power is to make certain recommendations and then the outcome of that is a political process where someone has to decide whether to take them forward, you're back to square one. You might as well lose the middle person and go straight to the political process.
Thank you very much. Anyone else that would like to weigh in, please go ahead. If not, I can go on with the next question. I would like to ask Bican Sahin on Turkey. I would like a comment on Turkey's recent decision to withdraw from the Istanbul Convention. So I would like, how do you think this will affect countries in Eastern Europe, apart from Turkey, where opposition against the convention is growing again? And also, I would like a comment on how do you foresee, whether you foresee further restrictions on HDP or the Turkish, the Kurdish section of the population?
Thank you so much. Let me start with the Kurdish issue. Unfortunately, Mr. Erdogan has been allying with the nationalist camp in Turkey in recent years to stay in power. And the Nationalist Party, Nationalist Movement Party, it's called in Turkey. They captured Erdogan. They took him as hostage, so to speak. And in order to consolidate their bases, they are now trying to play the nationalist card against a Kurdish minority. And also now in Turkey, there is two camps. On the one hand, this nationalist camp, and on the other, more democratic camp. And the Kurdish group is supporting the democratic cause. And by punishing the Kurds, the nationalist camp of Erdogan is trying to destroy this democratic camp. because votes are very important in the next election. And in the last year, Mr. Erdogan lost municipalities in Istanbul and in Ankara to a great extent, thanks to the Kurdish votes in favor of the opposition parties in the municipality elections. So to prevent this from happening, again, Mr. Erdogan is trying to destroy the Kurdish party, and so that they will not be able to gather help in the pro-democracy camp. So this was the second part of your question. The first one was about Istanbul Convention. Unfortunately, as Erdogan loses its democratic face and basis, he's playing the nationalist card and conservative card, unfortunately. This is giving also a message to his more conservative basis by getting out of Istanbul Convention. For those of you who are not familiar with Istanbul Convention, it is a convention about the rights of women, violence against women, and also LGBT, recognition of gender rights. Of course, this can encourage some other countries in Eastern Europe to go in the same direction. Hungary is doing that, we already know, and maybe Poland will follow the suit. So it is discouraging, definitely.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Now going to Mr. Valianatos, a question about Greece. We know that Greece is fourth from the bottom in terms of media freedom in the EU. Do you believe that the media in the country is doing its part in strengthening political freedom? And what is the role of social media?
Well, I start from the role of social media. I much more hope on that than the other way. You know, there is a problem with journalists in this country. Journalists in this country have no challenge of discussing freedom, of opening discussions, of dare say things, of right issues that we've been dealing during the last couple of hours. I mean, they go on and on and on and on with the same jargon, enjoying lies. I mean, you find populism among journalists being a mainstream. Journalists that speak up are exceptions. Journalists who speak up need protection. And I'm not going into the last incident, but there is a lot of work to be done with journalists. And we are supposed to approach them, ask them. We are supposed to evaluate what they're doing. We are supposed, as liberals, to call them upon freedom. We should discuss. I mean, I'm working on communication, but I believe in opening discussions with media, with civil society, with expeditions, with members of the parliament, with parties, with individuals, with businesses, with everything. We have great tools nowadays. We can show pictures. I mean, mind you, I give you one example. The Ministry of Migration is telling us, and the media are showing among news, during news, incidents between Lesbos and Turkey. They're lying. And at the same time, we have international channels, we have international organizations showing the full range of the video. You know, they're helpless. We are ahead of them. I mean, they're telling that there is no pushing back, and we have pictures, videos of people who have been in Greece. They have footage of Lesbos. They have been sent back to Izmir, and Greek authorities claim that they never reached Greece. We have the tools, and we are democratic enough to show them. We should challenge. I mean, you know, we're talking about influencing or policy in the European Union. We can speak as liberals. We liberals, with our parties, in our countries, with our friends, in our caucuses, with discussions, with videos, with articles, we can influence things. We have a great power, but we should do things. Yes, there was a question whether there should be a plan, an action plan. Yes, liberals should have action plans. We can find the situation in the way it is. We know how things can be better. We have all sorts of tools to work with. Let's do that.
Very promising. Anyone else that would like to comment on that, on how media, whether media are doing their part in terms of protecting political freedoms, not only in Greece generally? Mr. Schizas?
So I'll come in. I mean, partly it's echoing Gregor's point. The quality of the media really matters. You know, if your media are, you know, borderline bankrupt organizations that have not invested in personnel, talent, training, anything, and their main business model is, you know, in the best cases, to just run a very tight ship and produce the minimum possible needed to draw in advertisers, you know, you're asking them to do quite a bit with that resource to properly function as a bulwark against you know, government power. So some of the pushback has to come from citizens bypassing the traditional media. And some of that will look like political activism. Some of that will look like citizen journalism. Some of that will look like, you know, more exotic flavors of social media activity. But you know, that's how the dam breaks in a way. That, you know, we will find the path of least resistance. But I think you know, it's not. I don't think it's very helpful to think what should the media do when it's just not resourced to do it. And we have to, I think, face a reality that we're likely to not have serious allies in the media. Allies not in the sense of a political sympathizer, but in the sense of media doing their job and holding power to account. You know, we might be entering an age where we don't have that kind of media at our disposal. And the question is, what do we do then? Like, what's the actual answer? I think it's very realistic to think of a scenario where, you know, you won't have in places like Greece you know, a newspaper of record or TV channel or whatever with the actual resource and talent base to provide proper challenge. So you need to plan. We need to plan against that eventuality.
I see. Now I have two questions from the chat box, one from the chat box, one from Facebook, and I'm going to ask all of you to comment on that. Do we need an action plan for democracy in Europe is the first question. And the other, in thinking of the EU as a watchdog for freedom, we should not forget the step-to-step piling up of liberal verdicts of the European Court. Can you please comment on that? Ms. Pratt, would you like to start?
Thank you for the questions. The first question, if we need an action plan for democracy in Europe, it's hard to say because each country is different, and I think the level of democracy in each country is on the different level. So I think there are the countries which are more democratic, and if you would have one common action plan for democracy in whole Europe, it wouldn't be possible to apply it somewhere else because they are already, first, some countries are missing some steps and in other countries are already there. So I wouldn't say that we need an action plan for democracy. And the European Union is so kind of built on democracy. So the countries should be already in quite good level of development of this democracy plan, if I may say. And in thinking of the EU as a watchdog for freedom, well, we shouldn't forget the step-to-step link up of the liberal verdicts of the European Court. I don't think that all countries in the European Union are liberal. And this is the same thing. I think the EU can provide us good instruments, but it depends if we are able to use them and if we know how, because each country has their own government.
Thank you. Mr. Sahin?
With respect to this European Court, as I understand, European Court of Human Rights.
Yeah,
am
that's
I right?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. It's also a beacon of freedom and human rights. And in Turkey, with the rapid decline of rule of law, more and more people are turning and looking up to the European Court of Human Rights. However, as you already know, these decisions in the final analysis are implemented by the member countries. They are supposed to implement the decisions of European Court of Human Rights, but sometimes they fail. Unfortunately, Turkey has been failing recently very often with respect to the decisions against Turkey. But definitely it's a positive factor to be taken into account. I would agree.
Thank you. Mr. Valianados, what do you think? What is the role of the European Court of Human Rights in terms of promoting political freedoms and human rights?
I tried to answer this question earlier. Well, we appreciate the European Convention of Human Rights. We appreciate the Introductory Chapter. We appreciate the role of the European Court, although some decisions are not being implemented. I mean, my experience is that by getting there and trying and repeating and winning and having decisions not applied, still you gather speed, you have things to say, you demonstrate with things, and sometime later it ends in another way. We should try and have decisions. We should try and build argumentations. We should open discussions. We should have people discuss and agree with us. I'm not afraid of planning. We can only plan as liberals, and we can challenge other parties based on our good examples and experience. Yes, we can plan. Yes, we can be a watchdog. The European Convention can be watched. Freedom can be watched.
Thank you. Ms. Kalandache?
Yes, so adding to this last question, indeed, of course, I also fully agree. It is a beacon of rights, and then the hope for everyone who has not found justice, right, through other domestic recourse mechanisms. Of course, we are talking about indeed the full try to achieve the full cycle of justice and having these decisions implemented, of course, which is difficult in non-EU member states. Again, I think that's where the difference lies between the members and the non-members. But as has been said by other panelists, every effort in increasing the citizens' awareness and the understanding of the tool and the protocol that enables individual appeals, understanding and helping people file complaints and strategic litigation, be it or other measures, is absolutely worth it. It's a generally effective democracy education and the rights education tool. The other question about the democracy action plan. So of course we are all aware, and I understand this may not be part of the question directly, but still to mention the recently adopted action plan, democracy action plan that the EU has adopted. Of course, you know, this it deals with issues such as electoral integrity and disinformation and the related actions. I think one would perhaps want to see a bit more focus on enforcement of fundamental rights and the political freedoms. But nevertheless, it's an important instrument to somehow harmonize the actions of the member states when it comes to the clean elections, electoral integrity, and particularly the integrity of the campaign finance, online market targeting, and ethical use of online tools. I also agree with Sarka that if we're talking about the sort of the grand democracy action plan that, you know, sort of for member states, of course, that would need more nuance and more of a national context for each and every democracy at the member state level.
Thank you very much. And I would like to ask the same question to Mr. Schizas, and also I think we have already run out of time, so I would ask him for a closing comment. Thank you very much.
Yes, of course. So, so to me, you know, when I look at the question that says, you know, the step-to-step piling up of liberal verdicts, you know, every one of these liberal verdicts, especially when they come from a court outside of your own country, I think for us liberals is more homework. What I mean by that is that if you have the judiciary rowing faster towards freedom than the executive or than popular discourse, you set yourself up for backlash. You set yourself up for you know, for conflict somewhere down the line. So it's great that you know, you have these institutions to defend freedoms and rights, and it's the right thing. But every time one of these decisions runs ahead of where the executive is and of where popular discourse is, it just means you need to do that much more work in terms of advocacy, in terms of education, in terms of getting the message out, so that these decisions are normalized and they're not seen as imposed on an unwilling population. So I don't, you know, I'm glad that that's the direction of travel legally. But the legal direction of travel is just one part of the story. And if you don't follow up with the actual advocacy work that's needed to change kind of hearts and minds, then you end up in a situation where somewhere down the line people say, well, I don't want this foreign court to have jurisdiction over me. And you don't want to be in that situation.
Indeed. And with that, I would like to thank you all for this very, very interesting discussion. I think we got a lot of food for thought from all the comments here. And hopefully we'll do it again very soon, and hopefully face-to-face, not via Zoom. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. Have a nice evening.